So welcome everyone and thanks for joining us. I'm really pleased to be chairing this event tonight as part of the Arise Festival of Left Ideas. Due to an amazing level of interest as well as the Zoom tonight, we are also streaming live from the Arise YouTube and from various other Facebook and streaming pages. So welcome to everyone wherever you are coming from. It's great to share the platforms and to share ideas. Tonight, it is the Campaign for Trade Union Freedom and the Institute of Employment Rights who are co-hosting this event. Thanks to Matt Wilgress for organising this festival and inviting us to take part, and to Sam Browse and Ben Studd who are assisting with all the technology in the background. Great. My name is Carolyn Jones. I am the Director of the Institute of Employment Rights. And for those not aware of us, there is a link to our website in the chat box. Have a look. There's loads of information, briefings. There's a whole library of books on all issues relating to your rights at work. You can sign up to our weekly news brief. Same for the Campaign for Trade Union Freedom. All the information is there. You can subscribe and get involved, so please do. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to say a few words about the Institute. We are a network of academics, lawyers and trade unionists, and we are fighting for three simple things. First, improved rights from day one of employment for all workers, regardless of their status. Second, for stronger rights and protections for trade unions so that they can reach, represent and support workers in the workplace. And third, a central role for trade unions in determining how industry, workplaces and the economy should be run. And for a bit of background reading, in case you haven't got the full picture, I'd like to give a particular plug to the Institute's 2016 Manifesto for Labour Law. That offered, as John MacDonald said, a blueprint for a radical reform of UK labour law, and it's well worth a read. It contains over 25 major policy recommendations drafted by 26 leading labour law experts covering everything from health and safety, equality, whistleblowing, a whole load of issues and much more. We've seen during this pandemic the crucial role trade unions play in defending workers. So whether it's PPE for those in work or pushing the job retention scheme for those on furlough, the work done by trade unions has shone like a light throughout this crisis. And let's not forget, it was the teaching unions who forced the government to U-turn twice this month. It brings to mind, to me, a famous saying, updated perhaps to reflect this government's policies, and that is, first they came from our old people in care homes, then they came for our children in schools, next they will be coming for workers forced back into the workplaces without sufficient safety or security. And that is why we say enough is enough, and our call tonight is no going back. No going back to government bailing out businesses and leaving workers to pick up the price. No going back to trade unions being sidelined and ignored about decisions that determine their lives and their livelihoods. And no going back to essential workers being classed as unskilled or low paid, working long hours for little pay and no recognition of their worth to society. No going back. So tonight we have three excellent speakers, well-informed frontline fighters, ready to have their say on how best to resist the Tory agenda. And we want you to have your say too. So as the event goes on, please post questions and comments in the comments box below and in the Q&A session on the Zoom. And we will put some of those questions to our panel as the evening goes on. So moving to our speakers. First, I have Sarah Woolley. Sarah is the General Secretary of the Food and Allied Workers Union. And though relatively small in numbers, the union has a proud history of punching above its weight and by taking the fight to the employer and supporting their members resisting precarious work, the bakers have won a strong and loyal following. So, Sarah, tell us some of the ways you and your union are currently resisting the Tory agenda.
Thanks, Carolyn. There's never been, certainly in my time, my lifetime, a more important time to join a trade union and organise in your workplace. COVID-19 has highlighted the vast inequality in our society, the institutional racism embedded across the board, the neglect and underfunding of the NHS, the care sector and our education system, and the detrimental impact a decade of austerity has had on our working class society. It's highlighted how little the Tory government think of us and how all the jokes and smears around the Labour Party's manifesto pledges and talks around having access to a magic money tree can all disappear, well, apart from the tree which has been out in force during this, when it suits their agenda. But once the pandemic subsides, which could be months depending on if we have a second wave, the crisis will continue. Certainly for us, as the money will have to be paid back somehow, and the Tories aren't going to look to their rich friends to help. They've already suggested that self-employed people will share the burden through higher national insurance contributions and taxes, and more recently there's been mentions of pensions being impacted. This is on top of some employers, certainly who we've been dealing with, who will use the loss in revenue or the increase in sick pay through the pandemic as a reason to freeze hourly rates or cut terms and conditions, restructure their business, ultimately making redundancies, or in some cases, as we've already seen in the food industry with the Deli Foods or Percy Ingo, not to be here at all, which is only going to escalate the crisis further. We also know that the Tories have an agenda, one that whatever they say isn't designed to improve the lives of working people. The lack of acknowledgement in their guidance around health and safety legislation, for example, suggests that this will be on their agenda going forward to dilute pretty soon. And prior to COVID, if we remember, they were looking at the right to strike for comrades in other trade unions. These won't go away. It's just been simply delayed due to the virus. They've also used the situation we're in as a smokescreen to push through awful legislation such as the immigration bill, which hasn't had the courage it should have because we've all been concentrating on COVID and the impacts of that. But this tactic is not new for them. They've done the same for the last few years with Brexit. And once we're out of the other side of COVID, they'll simply find something else to use for us to focus our attention on. And I appreciate none of this sounds particularly positive, but we do have an awful lot of things to be positive about through this. You just have to look at the fantastic U-turn of Tim Martin from Wetherspoons. Initially, at the beginning of the pandemic, instead of reassuring his workforce that they would have jobs to come back to and that he'd look after them, he told them to go work at Tesco so they'd earn some money because he wasn't going to enter in the furlough scheme. The union members, who I'm extremely proud of, organised themselves, wrote to him an open letter which quickly gained traction throughout the trade union movement, but also throughout the Labour Party and the whole Labour movement as well. And as a result, those workers gained their furlough from day one. And granted, it was on 80% pay, which is a reduction of not only a fifth of their average wage, but plus a reduction of the tips and the bonuses as well. But 80% is a damn sight better than what they were looking at originally, which was nothing from their employer. The teachers' unions, especially NAU, have done some amazing work around not returning to schools in a full capacity until it's safe to do so with the 5 tests. And the pressure that they've put on the government and academies has been unbelievable. They held a Zoom meeting of around 18 to 20,000 people, which is absolutely massive. That's got to be the biggest meeting in trade union history. And their upsurge of membership and reps throughout this has been truly inspirational. The TUC has worked with the government to introduce the furlough scheme, and albeit it's flawed, it's not perfect, it has meant that millions of people have received some income through this, who otherwise would have, I dread to think what would have happened to those people, especially when they're working for the likes of Tim Martin, who had already written them off. And there are many, many more examples of the power of organised, unionised workplaces, both locally and nationally, that have gained wins through the pandemic, blocked detrimental changes that employers have tried to put in place, or have simply just ensured that their members are safe and healthy throughout. We know, though, that there are so many more workplaces out there that are organised or don't have a trade union on site, never mind a recognised one. And I'd strongly encourage, if you're watching this and you're in that situation, or you know a friend, or you've got a family member who is in that situation, encourage them to join a trade union. There are people out there who will happily advise which one, because not everybody will want to be a baker, though I can't understand why you wouldn't. The TUC is a tool on its website. There are some unions, though, that don't affiliate to them, so it's well worth looking, you know, across the board. And if there's a recognised trade union in your workplace, join it, but don't just join it. Don't play your subs every month or every week and just kind of go with the flow. Become active, become a rep, be a voice, be prepared to challenge your employer if they're doing something that they shouldn't be, and support those people around you that need that support. Because as this goes on and as we come out of the other end, people are going to need support. The mental health implications of this pandemic, we won't really truly understand for time to come. And we need workplace reps and workplace advisors in there to be a shoulder and there to be somebody to turn to. Organised, recognised workplaces are safer and have better terms and conditions and better pay than those that aren't. The only way we as a class can come out of this crisis in any way positively is by standing together, organising our workplaces and demanding better, because it's us that's kept the nation going through this. We've kept it fed. We've kept our children in education. We've kept things being transported, whether that be post, goods, or whatever. We've cared for people. The list goes on, and we deserve better, you know, than what we've had from the Tories from the last decade or so. Thank you.
Well done. Thanks for that, Sarah. I didn't realise I was in charge of my own mute button there, but you just reminded me, actually, one of the first jobs I ever had was in a bakery, so which was in Dublin. And it was great. I loved it. But I used to make my flatmates always starving because I went home smelling of currant buns and everything. So, but it was a good job. Anyway, thanks for that. Thanks for taking us through the Tory agenda. It's never a good positive story when we're talking about the Tories. So thanks for bringing in a few trade union victories, which help cheer us all up. I'm sure there'll be some questions for you at the end. I'll move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is John Hendy. John is the chair of the Institute of Employment Rights and vice president of the Campaign for Trade Union Freedom. He's standing counsel for a number of trade unions and a leading lawyer based in Earl Square Chambers. And last year, he was appointed by Jeremy Corbyn to represent Labour on employment law in the House of Lords. So, John, welcome. You've spent your life defending trade unions in the courts against hostile employers and against anti-trade union laws. More recently, you've been at the forefront of drafting progressive policy ideas aimed at transforming the UK workplaces. Tell us some of the key aspects of IER's policy proposals and how we as a movement can continue to fight for those alternatives in these difficult times. John.
Thanks very much, Cad. I think I should start really as a lawyer with a comment or two about the state of labour law at the present time. When we talk about labour law, we mean law at the workplace, individual rights and the collective rights of trade unions and so on. And what the current pandemic has demonstrated beyond all possible doubt now, we knew it beforehand, but it's been revelatory what has happened since. What everybody realizes is the complete failure of labour law to protect workers. And by that, I mean, fail to protect them in almost every respect. I mean, we haven't got time this evening to go through each and every aspect of that failure, but just let me mention a couple. First of all, something that Cad mentioned right at the beginning, health and safety at work. We know that there are strict laws requiring personal protective equipment, the personal protective equipment regulations. Those laws are simply flouted, not just by employers, but by the government itself. And we've got many, many cases of workers saying, look, we're not being given PPE, not just National Health Service workers for whom it's absolutely crucial because of the high risk, but also cleaners and people like that who are equally exposed to the risks and cannot be protected by social distancing or marks on the floor and so on. They should have every conceivable protection that is required, and the law requires that. If a risk cannot be eliminated by other means, then personal protective equipment is required to be given, and that's being simply ignored. And of course, we know that those who have suffered most in the workforce, those who are most exposed, are the lowest paid and the most essential of our workers. It's they who have taken the brunt of the infections and have had the highest death rates, tragically. So Labour law has failed on the health and safety at work front. We know that the health and safety executive and local authority enforcement officers have been denuded of funding over the last 10 years. They haven't got the resources to enforce the law themselves, and therefore government and employers are getting away with murder, almost literally murder, in failing to protect workers. But you can equally say that Labour law has failed in relation to other aspects as well. What about job security? We're meant to have laws against unfair dismissal, laws requiring consultation over redundancy, protection by way of redundancy payments and so on. Those laws have not had the effect of restraining already an additional 1.5 million unemployed people being added to the existing 1.36 million before lockdown. So we've now got 2.75 million people unemployed, and it's predicted that there may well be up to a further million by the end of this year. But I think probably the most important aspect of Labour law's failure, I haven't got time to go into all the others, but the most important is the failure of industrial democracy. Labour law has not ensured the voice of workers is heard by employers, or by government. And you can see this well, we know, for example, that for 40 years from the beginning of the Second World War, up until Mrs. Thatcher was elected in 1979, over 80% of British workers was covered by a collective agreement. Since then, that percentage has been cut to what I estimate now to be about 23% of workers. In other words, 3/4 of the workforce do not have a union to speak for them. They have no input into their terms and conditions. If they're offered a job, it's take it or leave it. And they have no say in their working lives. And COVID-19 has demonstrated this as well. Take the furlough scheme, which Sarah spoke about, and the many defects in it. One of those defects is that workers are not consulted whether to go on furlough or not. They have no voice in saying to the employer, hang on a minute, we think you ought to pay all the wages, or we think there ought not to be furloughs, or whatever. The government have given the furlough scheme exclusively to the employers to decide whether and how to implement it. So those are some of the failures. There are many other aspects that my colleague, Professor Keith Ewing, who's the president of the Institute, and I have written about. On the back of that, let's just mention some of the proposals that the Institute of Employment Rights has made for the future, the new world that Sarah is looking forward to. Much of these things are Labour Party policy, as Laura well knows, because Laura was the former Shadow Secretary of State for Employment Rights, and I had the honour to work with her in drafting some of these proposals. But I'll just mention some of the absolute key ones, if I may. First of all, was the proposal that there should be a Secretary of State for Employment Rights and Protections, and the Labour Party have accepted that, and Laura's current successor is Andy MacDonald. Second crucial proposal was the reinstatement of sectoral collective bargaining, and I want to say a word about that at the end. The third most important proposal was one that Cad mentioned in opening this evening, and that is that there should be a single status of worker for all our workforce. None of this different degrees of rights, different statuses for different kinds of workers, the employee, what the lawyers call the limby worker, the full self-employed and so on. Everybody will be a worker. The only exception will be those who are genuinely in business on their own account. And the fourth most important proposal of the Institute is that there should be a unified enforcement agency called the Workers' Protection Agency, properly funded, unlike the Health and Safety Executive, and with powers that go well beyond health and safety enforcement, power to enforce a minimum wage, slavery, even contracts of employment, and so on. There are, as Cad mentioned in opening, many other proposals in the book that she held up at the beginning on equality, on supply chains, on trade union rights, including the right to strike and so on. But obviously, in my 8 minutes, I haven't got time to go through them. So I'm going to, Carolyn, if I may, just by saying something about sectoral collective bargaining, because it's a proposition that is not well understood, even in the trade union movement, and that's because we've been deprived of it for so long. First of all, the idea is that there are minimum terms and conditions, not just wages and hours, but everything else, promotion chains, equality, gender pay gap, disability pay gap, all the rest of it should be negotiated by unions on behalf of workers on the one side and the employers on the other, setting minimum standards for each sector of the economy, one by one. So the bakers union would be one of the key negotiators for the food production and retail sales and so on. So that's how it works. And the idea is that once an agreement has been reached, that will be binding legally on every employer and on every worker in the sector. And the reason that this is so important is really fivefold. And I'll do them very, very quickly. One, because sectoral collective bargaining is the only effective way of raising wages, and workers need a wage rise. And the consequence of that is that if wages rise, so does demand in the economy. That stimulates the economy and investment and so on. It also increases the tax take to the government. So the government's got more money to spend on investment. It raises living standards, and it diminishes the amount of money the state spends through benefits in subsidizing low wages. That's number one. Number two is that sectoral collective bargaining diminishes inequality, and inequality is surely one of the greatest blights on modern capitalism in this country. Even the OECD has now recognized that sectoral collective bargaining is the way out to diminish inequality. Thirdly, and the employers love this one, sectoral collective bargaining prevents employers, bad employers, undercutting good employers, because all the labour costs are the same across the piece. Everybody's got to pay a grade 4 electrician, whatever the rate is agreed for a grade 4 electrician. Fourth, sectoral collective bargaining is the effective way of ensuring industrial democracy. It gives workers through their unions a voice in setting terms and conditions of employment. And fifthly, not so important to you guys, no doubt, but to Professor Ewing and myself, absolutely crucial, sectoral collective bargaining is a requirement of international law. And we think the government ought to comply with the international legal treaties which have been ratified by the UK and are binding on it. Sorry, Cad, if I've run over time there.
No, not at all, John. I think that was about absolutely dead on time. So well done. Thanks for that. Brilliant as ever. Thanks for galloping through the current failures in the law and leading us on to some future possibilities. I know you're drafting a new publication at the minute, so I'm sure everyone looks forward to reading that. A great summary of where we should be, even if we're not there yet. I will move on so that we keep within our time scale. Our next speaker is Laura Pidcock, someone who I think needs little introduction from me, but I'm going to anyway. She has been referred to as one of the most powerful and effective voices in the Labour movement. So, well done, Laura. Laura was elected MP for North West Durham in 2017 until 2019. And as John said, she was Shadow Secretary for Employment Rights under Jeremy Corbyn. Laura is currently involved with the People's Assembly Against Austerity. Again, there's information in the chat box. And Laura hosts the People's Assembly's Thursday evening Zoom series called Making Sense of the Crisis. And I'm jealous of all the people that she's been interviewing and speaking to, not least Noam Chomsky. I'm so jealous. So Laura, I feel like you're in the wrong seat at the moment, that you should be chairing. You chair those People's Assembly events so brilliantly, attracting massive crowds from people hungry for change. So a lot of respect for that continuing work. Tell us something, Laura, about your alternatives to the Tory agenda and how we as a movement can make sure our voices are heard by those elected to represent us. Laura.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, and it's an absolute honour to come after Sarah and John. And I think that quote that Carolyn read out was from me mum, because it was just so kind. But it is really a pleasure. And things have changed so much, haven't they? So as John was talking there about the demands, and when he first set them out to me when I was appointed Shadow Secretary of State for Employment Rights in what was originally to be termed the Ministry of Labour, I just, I'd heard John speak and I'd heard the IER at different events like at Durham Miners Gala, and followed them around a bit, I'm not ashamed to say. And I was just blown away by the revolutionary potential of that content, what change that could make to work in people's lives. And I was so excited, so nervous as well, at us being within touch and distance of being able to make that change. We really were. I could sense it. I could sometimes in early 2018 sense that there was this huge appetite for change. We know that if the Labour Party had been in power right now, workers would undoubtedly have a minimum rate of £10 per hour. So much would have been in the legislative pipeline to change work in people's lives, but that opportunity has gone now, and we could, and it was Noam actually, Carolyn. No, I'm just saying Noam as if I know him. I interviewed him. He's an absolute living legend. But he did say this man has been campaigning for decades for his kind of politics, and he did say, when you are staring at this kind of defeat, and when you are staring at the scale of this health and political crisis, and really in the knowledge that there are those in positions of huge influence and power who wish to replicate the system that we already have, when we look at that, we can do two things. We can be miserable, we can be scared, or we can contribute to a fight back. The last 2 years have been so politically frustrating, and hello to everybody who is tuning in. That is a certain sign that there's an appetite for resistance and a fight back, but it can feel distressing to look at the scale of the challenges ahead of us, looking at the set of serious problems and placing that alongside the recipe for solutions, and realizing that there's a huge gap, there's a void. It seems too much. We have an ecological crisis in which an uninhabitable world is a perfectly realistic prospect. We have a political framework and establishment which has moved so far away from addressing the actual problems that workers face, that of inadequate housing, endemic poverty pay, of the huge gaps between the richest and the poorest, the erosion of secure employment, the defunding of public services, the pathologizing of human movement for anything other than servitude, and so much more. And of course, we could stare into that abyss and feel impotent, defeated, and small when we have a whole system which feels like it's against our innate needs as humans. And the coronavirus has illustrated perfectly the fragility of that system that the capitalist mentality has built. It is built within it all of that fragility, the crude hierarchy of protections that John and Sarah talked about, that coronavirus has highlighted. So you are literally shielded and protected from this virus if you are a higher earner, if you are the wealthiest. You are likely to twice as likely to die from the virus if you are living in the poorest communities. The way in which our economic system is so utterly dependent on consumption, and often totally unnecessary consumption, and I'm not being judgmental about that, it just is a fact. It's highlighted the importance of the security system, but the erosion of it too. And in the face of all of that, what we have to do, I think, is think about the possible ways forward. What do we have within our control? What do we want to campaign on? And how do we actually win? And the elephant in the room right now is the left and our relationship within the Labour Party. And many of us will have felt distressed at that relationship within the Labour Party. And I'm just going to be really clear to this Arise Festival. For what it's worth, I think it is very important to stay in the Labour Party and to make sure there is an effective organising left membership within the Labour Party. We know that a successfully left organising group within the Labour Party changes the policy direction of the Labour Party. We cannot forget the power relationships, whether it be in the Labour Party, whether it be in the workplace, are always in the favour of those who are most effectively organising and ruthlessly in solidarity with each other. But aside from that, we must look at where there are other opportunities too, where we can apply pressure and where we can win for working people. And for that, as the other two speakers have said, we have to look to the trade union movement and of course to workplaces. So what pressure can be applied to this government from those places? So from the extra parliamentary movement, from workplace organisation, can literally change the course of what is to come next for working people. It can change the government's mind. They always leak little things, don't they, to see what the mood is and what kind of fight back there will be. And we need to make sure that there is a vociferous fight back against any proposal to do this. What do we not want? We do not want the continuation of austerity. We don't want the continuation of pay freezes, further attacks on workers' rights. We don't want the continuation of subsidies for fossil fuel industries. We don't want the continuation of poverty pay, rabid exploitation where that is allowed to go unchecked. What do we want? Well, we do want the eradication of in-work poverty, the proliferation of sustainable energy. We want a mass house building programme, council house building programme, where the legislative framework is changed away from it being totally sewn up for the building developers. We want workers to have control over their terms, conditions and pay, and I am in absolute unity with John Hendy through a system of collective bargaining. We want there to be a policy of full employment that this government sets out, that we see the biggest job creation programme we have ever seen, and we just have to start expecting more as a class. And we want the democratisation of the workplace as a bare minimum. And for that, the only way that working people can get that, and the labour movement as a whole, is to turbocharge our activism, to be ruthless in how we organise and in our arguments, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter or in the workplace, and that we take to the streets when it is safe to do so as an expression of resistance against this government. Because how are workers feeling right now? I know it from my own family. They're feeling frustrated, worried about the future, utterly let down by the political class. I don't know about you, but I find it quite mentally distressing to be looking at the current situation and thinking, oh my goodness, so we're easing the lockdown, that means that protection will disappear, that protection will disappear, that scheme will disappear for that set of people. That means, you know, let's just take one teacher that I know, they have to wash the toilets down after every single pupil goes to the toilet. Every single time they have to disinfect that. So they are literally interacting with the possibility of the virus every single time, not for extra pay, not for extra recognition, and that's just a given. And never mind the even more precarious settings in work, where workers are literally at the forefront of protecting us from this virus. So rather than coming out of this crisis with it feeling demoralized, we should have more confidence than ever before that it is literally working people that have saved fellow working people, not stockbrokers, not billionaires, but working people. So how do we get through that pain, all of these different challenges? It's has to be through worker solidarity in dispute. It is through local and national mass mobilisations of people onto the streets when it's safe, as I said. It's about the extra parliamentary, and I think this is so crucial, Carolyn, it's about the extra parliamentary movement facilitating a network of activists who are ready to organise around industrial disputes, because we know how stripped back the trade union capacities to enter workplaces has been. Access to the workplaces is very difficult. So we know reps and conveners, when there is a dispute, are completely tied up with organising in the workplace. I think it's then incumbent on the movement at large to help organise the community to be there in solidarity with those workers, be it through solidarity on picket lines or protests, or facilitating local meetings to raise the consciousness about jobs at threat or terms and conditions at threat. We have to strengthen that link between the political and the industrial, because there is where the battle lines will be in the coming years. So all of the victories, and this is where I'll close, Carolyn, all of the victories of the past have been delivered by working people in solidarity with each other, either placing pressure on people to legislatively change things, or to change things, change the employer's minds in the workplace. But look at what public pressure has done in just the last few months. Schools would have fully been back by now if it hadn't have been for the National Education Union, for parents, for carers standing in solidarity with those trade unionists. If it hadn't have been for the trade union movement, if it hadn't have been people getting behind Marcus Rashford's campaign of school vouchers over the summer period, they would have ended that scheme, not a bother. Look at the NHS surcharge for those people in the NHS. That would have continued if it had not been for public pressure. Just imagine if we become more demanding, if we become more organised, if we are totally in solidarity with workers in different sectors, what we can achieve. Because and I will end on this, Carolyn, is that we've clapped those people every single Thursday night, haven't we? We've gone out there in gratitude for those people, for the postal workers, NHS workers, for the care workers, and more. Well, as we come out of this crisis, those very same workers are going to have a set of demands that they want us to be in solidarity with. What the right will try and do, they'll try and convince us that they're a different set of workers. They're not the same ones that you were clapping, these horrible trade unionists. They're different. They're the same set of workers that, when they were serving us, will now ask us to serve them in realising their demands. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak here tonight. I think we can take heart and hope from understanding where our power lies and looking for those opportunities to exert pressure. And in that, we certainly will change the course of history, and we certainly will win for working people. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you as ever for that, Laura. Inspiring as ever, I should say. Great words, great way of expressing them, and great inspiration to workers. I you've obviously, word's obviously got out that you're on, because the numbers watching are going up by the minute. So very good. I think apart from the over 100 that we have on the Zoom, we've got over 350 people watching on various streams, including from Grimsby, Southport, London, Hertfordshire. I don't know how they know all of this, but they do. Rotherham, Chippenham, Stockport, Wales, the Western Isles, a whole load of people. So welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us on this event. It's time now. We do have some time to go for some questions, and I'm just having a look at some that people have raised. I'll ask a few, and then I'll ask our panel to, you don't have to answer all of them. You can maybe pick, you know, one or two of the ones that you are interested in. So there are a number of people asking about the danger of a new wave of Tory austerity, but of a different form, and that it could be used to play one group of workers, or indeed the unemployed, off against each other. How can we avoid this and ensure that the new Labour leadership stands for the kind of alternative that we have been talking about here tonight? That's one of the questions. Linked to that, there is another, which is, what are likely Tory attacks on workers' rights in the next period likely to be? And what can we learn from how workers' rights and living standards were systematically attacked during the financial crisis and onward? So it's more or less the same theme. What's coming down the line and how do we resist it? So who'd like to start? If you don't put your hand up, I'm going to pick on one of you. Sarah, you've been sitting there a while for not saying anything, so maybe you should go first.
And I was trying to avoid eye contact. Joking. I think, wow, what are the likely attacks on working rights? I think, wow, who knows? I definitely think there's something in there around the health and safety legislation. It's no coincidence that it wasn't included in any of the guidance that they put out to employers, so that employers could say, look, I've followed the guidance. You know, yes, there might be the Health and Safety Act, but it doesn't say that in the guidance, and I followed the guidance. I've done my thing. I've ticked the box. Off we go. That just, it concerns us massively that that's going to just put people at risk down the line. How do we stop people from kind of the government from playing people against each other and going down another wave of austerity? I think Laura kind of hit the nail on the head by saying, you know, we need to stand in solidarity with each other. I think we've got to remember that these are lines that the Tories are feeding us. They want that division. It works. Whilst ever we're fighting against each other, we're not looking at what they're doing to us, and it's a definite tactic of theirs and has been for years, you know, but we need to be better at standing together. And I think one thing that has come out with the clapping every Thursday night for the NHS workers is people are starting to form their communities again, and understanding that neighbour that doesn't go out to work every day doesn't go out to work for a reason, you know. It isn't just that, you know, they're one of these benefit scroungers or whatever other derogatory term that has been forced upon us over the last few years. And I think that's massively powerful that those communities are coming back, but we need to build on that. We can't just say we're not going out on a Thursday night anymore. See you later, neighbour, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. We need to kind of build on that, and we've got a lot of work as a Labour movement to do that and to make sure that we're stood in solidarity.
Yeah, smashing. Thanks very much. John? You need to unmute.
I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
Yeah, danger of a new wave of austerity. Well, I mean, obviously, that's the Tories are going to try that. After the last financial crisis 10 years ago, so far as workplace rights are concerned, I suppose the most important attack was the Trade Union Act of 2016, which attacked the trade unions in relation to certain limitations on the right to strike, ballot majorities and all the rest of it, which have had a serious impact. But in particular, of course, they attack the political funds of trade unions by requiring workers to opt into paying the political levy. And the effect of that has been really serious on the funding of the party. I think for the future, no doubt the Tories will have in mind, well, we know what they've got in mind because we follow the negotiations over Brexit, the negotiations with the EU. And one of the things that the Tories cannot bear is the idea of a level playing field in environmental rights and in particular in workplace rights. So why won't they accept level standards and the maintenance of the same standards of minimum rights that our colleagues in the continent of Europe have? It must be because they intend to downgrade those rights in the UK. So I imagine that they'll wish to downgrade health and safety rights, working time rights, possibly redundancy consultation. I don't know. What we do know is that they've got an employment bill. They're proposing an employment bill, and we'll have to see what's in it. Nobody knows at the present time. You asked about the new Labour leadership. Well, so far, Keir Starmer has said that he would stand by the workers' rights in the manifesto, and I hope that he does. Andy MacDonald, the Shadow Secretary of State, has committed to the proposals of the Institute of Employment Rights and the proposals in the last manifesto on workers and trade union rights, and I have no doubt of his sincerity whatsoever. But politics is ever changing, isn't it? So it pays all of us to be on our guard and maintain the pressure. The changes that I outlined are absolutely crucial for working people, absolutely crucial to guarantee the space where workers can exercise collective power. And I think Sarah's absolutely right to say the answer to all this is solidarity. And that may be one of the things that we learned from COVID-19 is human solidarity, standing together. And that may be the way we can achieve the sort of collective pressure that Laura was talking about.
Great, thanks, John. And before I go into Laura, there was another question that's been raised, and it picks up your theme about solidarity, John, and about developing community organising and collectively working together. And there's a question that asks, how can trade unions and the Labour left link up and support movements like the Black Lives Matter movement and those in our communities, such as rent unions and others, which are resistant elements of the Tory agenda? So it's how do we bring all those in struggle together into a united force? Laura.
Actually, I do think that's a very good question, but on the austerity point, I'm the National Secretary of the People's Assembly, as you said at the start, and I think they have always done a really good job at making sure people understand that austerity is a political decision, not a political necessity. And I think especially you saw some of the leaks a few weeks ago now about pay freezes, about end on the triple lock of pensions. There is no doubt that the Tories will try, although they're talking about kind of big infrastructure projects to grow our way out of this. I just don't believe it. It's not really within their political ideology to try and recover from a crisis like that, because let's remember their ideology is about the free market. It is about, you know, not heavy state interventionism, although they've had to do some of that throughout this crisis. And so even on their own terms, post the financial crisis, they failed. So they failed to bring down the debt. I'm not saying that that has to be a political objective of ours to bring down the debt, actually. Quite the contrary, if that debt is for productive purposes and helps us avoid a depression, then that is a positive thing. But so if we're going for austerity 2.0, then we have to be really clear that we will resist that, because when they tried it the first time, what did we end up with? 14 million people in poverty. Many of those people are in work. we've ended up with record levels of child poverty, and they are literally trying to pay for the global financial crash, and then of course a health crisis on the backs of working people who did nothing to create it. And we just have to flatly reject that. And in terms of all of the different movements working together, I do think there has to be more of that. So I think there is scope for a huge gathering of all the different activist spaces, so solidarity between all of the trade unions, Black Lives Matter, the People's Assembly, the IER, the different elements of whatever kind of groups exist right now, to say what are our commonalities, what kind of hits our class, and what will we work together on to resist. That would be a massively powerful force. I think as well, it's more clever, isn't it, than, because quite often people are like, oh, you're always trying to bash the government, and it is more complex, isn't it, than the government slashing pay. It's more complex than that. It's a legislative environment that allows there to be such weak power relations within the workplace that pay can be slashed with little or no recourse to justice for those workers, or it's very, very difficult. So either you have to be in a workplace that is recognised, so you have to have, and apologies if this kind of sounds patronising, but I don't think there's a huge knowledge of how trade union recognition works, or you have to be in a workplace where you are recognised. So that means there has to be enough trade union density, so enough members to prove that you should have bargaining rights, essentially, and the right to collectively negotiate your pay terms and conditions. And we know that there's been a downward trend in the amount of workplaces where there is recognition or enough of a trade union membership. So we have to be part of a cultural revolution on trade unionism. We've seen a huge uptake of trade union membership, probably because workers are very, very scared, and that they're seeing the work that trade unions have always done, essentially, to be at the forefront of protecting workers' rights. We have to use that membership to try and move away from, and John and I talked about this a lot in trying to set up this Ministry of Labour now, Department for Employment Rights and Protections, that it isn't just about a personal protection scheme. I get why, that is definitely why I first joined a trade union, in case somebody accused me of stealing and I hadn't done anything wrong, or in case somebody, put in a complaint against me. But that individual protection is one element. The next, but more powerful element, is that common bond, that link to your fellow worker, and all of those links make you more powerful than your employer through your strength, essentially, to demand what you want in the workplace. So yes, it won't be the government saying, make sure people are paid less. It will be the government's inaction to do anything about what we probably have all predicted for a long time, that the most exploitative employers will use the coronavirus crisis to lay off tens of thousands of workers, to then, when demand picks back up, re-engage those workers or re-employ them on drastically reduced terms, conditions and pay, because they will think of it as a clearing of the decks, and we'll have to resist that together.
Marvellous. Thanks for that, Laura. Of course, there is another one, and it's perfectly true that one of the reasons we need unions in the workplace, and preferably terms and conditions negotiations sectorally, is so that workers aren't having to fight on their own in the workplace by workplace, for every right by right, that is. And one of the reasons for that is because the Tories are already looking at reintroducing the idea of fees for taking an employment tribunal case. So they're already drafting that paper and looking for consultation. We know that Unison and their case against it won last time, and it's something to watch out for. It's something we're going to have to campaign against, to make sure that they're not introduced, because we know it leaves people very vulnerable in the workplace to being able to enforce the limited rights that they have. I'm going to just outline some forthcoming events before I run out of time, and Matt will kill me if I don't do the promotions to end it all up. So the next Arise event as part of the Arise Festival is on Wednesday, July the 1st at 7 o'clock. And that is called Trump's War on China. And the speakers will be Diane Abbott, Emma Dent-Code and Murad Qureshi of the Stop the War Coalition. Plugging the Institute, we have an event on tomorrow night between 7 and 8 o'clock, and that is on the role of trade unions in the public sector. And we have Dave Ward from CWU, Matt Rack from the FBU, and Mark Sawatka from the PCS. So everyone is welcome to join us for that tomorrow night. It's a busy time, isn't it? We're all Zooming and going to more meetings than we would even when the doors are open. So we have 5 minutes. Nobody is pushing any more questions towards me, so perhaps it would be useful then if, don't know if you have one last message for people to leave the event thinking about. So, Laura, a sentence.
Harsh. Don't give up. Don't give up heart, because those who wish to exploit and oppress are certainly not giving up and giving up heart. They're using this as an opportunity. We have all the power. We just have to know how to use it and how to exert it. I certainly haven't given up hope. There is a world to win. Thanks, Carolyn.
Cheers, Laura. John, how about you?
One word, it's solidarity.
That'll do nicely. Solidarity with that. And Sarah?
How do I follow that? I would just encourage you to have a look at Sheffield Needs a Pay Rise. Somebody asked about how the trade unions and Labour left can work together going forward, and they're doing some fantastic work in Sheffield. Olivia Blake MP, Acorn, the Trades Council, the Bakers Union, some amazing work around community organising and organising in the workplace. There's some fantastic work going on nationally. Please don't give up hope, because standing in solidarity, we can make things better.
Brilliant. Well, 3 positive notes from our 3 excellent speakers tonight. So it's just for me then to round this all up. We know we have important battles ahead. And we know just how important our campaigning for people, for the health, for the planet, all that is. And we can't give up on that battle, as each of our speakers have said, because people are more important than private profit, and we have to stand up for that. So please get involved with the Institute, get involved with the Campaign for Trade Union Freedom, get involved with the People's Assembly, and do tune into the upcoming Arise events. We must keep working together to insist there's no return to business as usual when it comes to our economy and politics. And we do know that if we stick together, unite in solidarity, another world is possible, and there is a better world to win. So thanks for getting involved tonight, everybody in the audience. Thanks particularly to our speakers who give up of their time, and thanks for everyone